This is our last Sunday in talking about courage and faith. And today's story takes place in the Old Testament in a time of transition from Moses passing the baton to Joshua of leadership. Moses knows that he is at the end of his life, that he will not be going with Israel into the promised land. He will not be crossing the river of Jordan to go into the promised land. And he's standing there on the banks, and he has a message for Joshua and God's people. If you read earlier in Deuteronomy, you will see that much of that book is Moses giving the people of Israel his commentary, his rules for how to live in covenant with God. But now in chapter 31, he has an important word to offer here at the end of his life. And I invite you to read along with me, Deuteronomy 31, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all of Israel. I'm now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the king of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." And then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all of Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." So let's start with a quick reminder about who Moses and Joshua are and what's happening here. They have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 long years. Moses is truly the most important central figure in all of Judaism. If there were awards being given out, Moses gets MVP. He is that important. He led the people to freedom from slavery in Egypt. He brought the law in Mount Sinai. He was there and listened to all that complaining of, are we there yet? And even that time they tried to worship a golden calf. He was their leader through it all. And finally, they are on the banks of the river Jordan, and on the other side is the land promised to their people. In many ways, Moses shaped these former slaves into the people of the covenant. And who is Joshua? Well, Joshua is Moses' right-hand man. He is a military leader. He's been with Moses through the entire journey. He would be the one who will pick up the baton of leadership for God's people. He would create a strategy for defeating the Canaanite armies. He is one of Moses' most important trusted advisors. In fact, when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to get the law, it was Joshua who was waiting nearby all that time. Moses and Joshua have been step-by-step leaders all these years. And now is a monumental moment because Moses knows he's at the end of his life. God has told him, you're not going further. This is the end of the journey. And he takes this time to pass the baton of leadership to Joshua. You know, at one point in Deuteronomy, Moses, well, often actually, if you read Deuteronomy, you see that Moses often got frustrated with God's people. At one point, he actually said, I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you have been rebellious against the Lord while I am still alive and with you, how much more will you rebel after I die? There were times Moses got frustrated. Times Moses worried about how God's people would handle this time of transition. And yet, now, in this moment, he chooses an important message to give God's people and Joshua. He's done with all the do's and don'ts. He's done with all his parting wisdom. He has one final message that he wants to give to both the people and to Joshua. And the message is the same. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For God goes ahead of you and will be, as promised, to never leave you or forsake you. He says to the people, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And he says to Joshua, be strong and courageous, for you must go with the people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors. The Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And I wanted to use this story of Moses and Joshua today because I think they give us an example of what to do, particularly in those crossroad moments of our lives, times of transition and change. Here they are at the beginning of this new change in leadership after 40 long years, and Moses gives them a message. Be strong, courageous, do not be afraid, because the God of our Lord has promised to never leave you or forsake you. You know, one of my favorite authors is Anne Lamott, and she writes about how one time she's a nervous flyer. She hates to fly. It always scares her to fly. And she was heading out on a big international trip. And so she asked for prayers in church for safety as she was flying, and everybody prayed for her that day. And as they were leaving, her minister said to her, you know, Anne, by the time you get on the plane, it's too late for beggy prayers. It's time for trust and surrender. Now, personally, when it comes to beggy prayers, I am a frequent flyer. But she's right, especially in those crossroad moments, especially in those moments where there's nothing left to do but trust and surrender. And this is why Moses' advice is so courageous to me. Because after all his talk of don't do this or don't do this, he chooses to give them a message of trust and surrender. The uncertain path ahead. No matter how big and how bad and how strong the army on the other side of the river looks, he gives them a message. Trust, surrender. Even if Joshua doesn't know that he's up to the challenge of leadership, he gives them a message of trust and surrender. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear, for God goes with you and has promised to never leave you or forsake you. You know, we happen here at church to be at somewhat of a crossroads and a new beginnings, because if you have not yet heard, our church is in the process of starting a brand new ministry, something we've never done before, something that doesn't even exist in our own community. We are beginning an adult day program for people living with mild to moderate dementia. It's going to be called Friends Place. And we are working with a national network called Respite for All that's helping us every step of the way, that actually helps faith communities start programs like this. And it's exciting. We're going to be, Friends Place will meet 2 days a week, 10 to 2 p.m. It'll be a paid enrolled program that people who are living with mild to moderate dementia can come and be a part of. Thanks to grants that we've already received, we have hired a part-time director to help lead the charge, who will be starting shortly. And our hope is that maybe in November of this year, we will begin this program for the very first time. And beginning this week, you're going to be hearing lots and lots more about it. I hope you'll keep your eyes open on social media and email, and please take note of ways that you can help and be a part of this ministry. But right now, what we especially need is your prayers, because we are at the beginning of this crossroads of this new ministry. You know, this week I was reading a memoir by a pastor, and he actually wrote that he thinks two of people's greatest fears in life, he said, is to lose control and to experience isolation. Think about this, as far as your own life, to lose control and to experience isolation. It's one of the reasons I am so especially thrilled about this ministry begin to take root in our community, because when it comes to those fears, this ministry will be combating those. There's not a person in this room today whose life hasn't been touched by someone living with dementia. We all know somebody who's experienced this, and we're going to be able to help people live with more joy and hope and community in spite of dementia. And the other thing is, I know that this will be a wonderful thing for caregivers, and I know it will be a wonderful thing that'll probably help people to stay longer in their homes. But to live with more joy, hope, and community. We say the mission of our church is to be a servant congregation. And I am excited about this ministry because I see that this will be a servant ministry to help people continue to thrive and have meaning and joy in their life. But I appreciate your prayers, because we are at a crossroads of a new beginning. And when Moses' message to us today, his message to God's people, his message specifically to Joshua as a leader, be strong, have courage, the Lord goes with you wherever you go. He has promised to never leave you or forsake you. I'm remembering these words, especially as we begin this new ministry, to remember that God has already got this when we step out in faith. And what would be some of his final moments of life, his final messages to the people? Moses wants to tell them that in spite of the change, in spite of what's unknown, in spite of grief and loss, that they can still be strong and courageous, and to remember that they do not walk this road alone. Even if the army looks really strong on the other side of the river, even if you aren't sure you're up to the challenge, Moses knows that he can't see the future either, but he has the courage to recognize that the God who has got them through the wilderness, God who has got them freedom from slavery, would be one step ahead of them on the journey. He's promised to never leave you or forsake you. It's trust and surrender. I think of Jesus' ministry, and one of what I think happens to be one of the biggest crossroads of his life and ministry, and that is the moment of the Garden of Gethsemane. That moment is so important because they've already had the upper room. Judas has gone to do what he's going to do, and they all know what is about to happen next, or at least they fear what is about to happen next. And all the disciples go to sleep, and it's Jesus praying alone in the garden. And do you remember his prayer? Lord, take this cup from me. Not my will, your will be done. It's trust and surrender. Not my will, but your will be done. It was a prayer of trust and surrender of all that would happen next. And I think of all the times that I have gone to visit folks or to talk with folks, and I go planning to be the one to offer some word of encouragement, and yet I leave realizing I was the one who just got preached to. Kara, I'm going to be okay. No matter what the test results are, no matter how the surgery goes, no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter if I live or if I die, I'm in God's hands. He's promised to never leave me or forsake me, so there's nothing to fear. You know, the not so little secret of ministry is how many times we're the ones who received the message, because we have a front row seat to all of your lives, to witness your courage and strength in hard and uncertain times of life, to trust and surrender of whatever comes next. So when you find yourself in one of those crossroads, when you find yourself filled with uncertainty or fear or worry, and you're not even sure what will come next, after you've prayed every single beggy prayer that you've got, and go ahead and pray them, maybe then you will find yourself with courage like Moses. Maybe you'll walk down to the edge and look out ahead and truly know there's nothing to fear. God goes with me. He's promised to never leave me or forsake me. Thanks be to God. Amen.